So what's that Korean name that I had again?
Gongjingun.
Does that mean anything in Korean?
I don't think it does, but I'm sure it might be offensive in certain regions, but we'll see.
We'll see how it goes.
We'll see what happens.
All right, welcome back to another video. Today we're taking things a little differently. We're making a slightly different kind of video. So this is going to be kind of like a part podcasting and then part just having a conversation in this big house, not a little house. So we've got Matt Collins today joining us to talk about language learning. Welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, so what's your story?
Well, I'm actually going on student exchange to Korea soon in less than 6 months. So I've been learning a bit of Korean. Robin and I are good friends here. We've been developing. And yeah, we've been really kind of pushing forward on doing different things here and there. And finally, we're able to get a video out together.
Get a collab.
Really good to be here.
So basically Matt was my model for the lookbook video.
That is true.
And before that, we've decided to collab for the longest time. Matt's also a YouTuber. Check him out in the description down below. But I just want to open up, get the cat out of the bag here. Cat's out of the bag. So what fascinated you about the Korean language in the first place?
I found the university that I was planning on going to probably about 1.5 years ago. And I knew that I was really interested by, I guess, Asian languages most specifically, because they seem to be so much more abstracted away from my native language of English that it seemed like a really great opportunity to try to embody something completely new, something completely different, to see the world from an entirely new framework as compared to the way that I had been kind of experiencing it up to this point. Between the three primary, sorry if that angers anyone in the comments, in my mind there was 3 primary options, being Chinese, Japanese, or Korean. And through looking through those different options, I just think that Korean was kind of the best combination of an interesting alphabet, an interesting accent or sound that I would be needing to kind of produce, and then also the cultural aspects in what I'd be doing in the student exchange opportunity. And that's the motivation that I kind of continue to have as I continue to learn more.
So I really love that point of view. Like, you talked about how when you learn a new language, it's like diving into a new frame of thinking. Like even with me, like with French, for example, I physically feel like a different person when I'm speaking French.
Yeah.
And then just like you kind of turn into you adopt another personality. When I speak English, I'm kind of like fluffy, around a corner. Just kind of like cut corners and stuff. I don't say what I really mean. But in French, there's this kind of like subconscious courage that I have just to like get it out of my mouth as soon as possible.
I think in learning a new language, we don't have as much vocabulary, we don't have as much capacity to say the things in the ways that we usually would say them in our native language. So to a certain extent, I'm still very early in this process, but to a certain extent, you have to be able to simply put down that wall of, I need this to sound exactly the way that I want it to be or how I think it should be. And you have to be a little bit more direct, I feel, because you don't have the capacity to do anything else otherwise. And so that's another really interesting component of, as you said, learning a language, almost embodying a new character to a certain extent. You have a chance not only to see a new framework of the world, but a new framework of yourself as well, to a certain extent, which I think is really, really interesting.
How did you overcome the fear of first practicing this language? Because you told me that you did language exchange online. You went on Zoom, you talked to Korean people. How did you overcome that fear of like really stepping over the bounds of like, okay, so here's the book stuff, but I'm actually going to take this book stuff into like a real world language learning context?
Yeah, well, I mean, from the very beginning, I really wanted to try to mess up as quickly as I could, make as many mistakes as early on in the process as I could. And again, I'm still pretty early on in the process in terms of proficiency wise, but from the very beginning, I wanted to, even not knowing, many things in an objective sense, I wanted to get the, as I said, the mistakes as quickly as I could. And so it's very easy when you're talking with someone or attempting to talk with someone and you don't have the words to say, that is going to expedite the process of getting those mistakes. And so, yeah, I had a great time talking with a handful of different people in this kind of conversation exchange kind of situation. And I think that's the best way to solidify the things that you learn, the concepts or the phrases or vocabulary that you do understand, it forces you in that moment to recall whatever you can, and it scrounges up the most potential you have for making a conversation to your highest extent, to a certain extent, I feel.
Sometimes I feel like with like French, for example, most of the stuff, like grammar stuff, for example, that I'm learning, in classrooms, they weren't that useful in a sense that like no one ever talks like a book in real life.
Yeah.
So if you really want to make mistakes and speak, well, the language in its original context, it makes a lot of sense for you to like make a fool of yourself in front of other people first.
Yeah.
So there are numerous occasions where I say things wrong when I'm visiting the French cafe. So if you've seen my video on how to make language more fun and, well, effective, so check out that video. I talked about the French cafe as a method for me to practice French, but there were numerous times that I just simply ran out of things to say, and I'm just kind of like either switch to English or just like sit there like a idiot.
Yeah.
And yeah, but it's really good that I got that out of my system really quickly. So now I'm able to just sort of like click into a rhythm. So I have a few stock phrases.
Yeah.
I have a few stock phrases as a launch pad for me to like, okay, so if you can't think of that thing, you can still jump back to this thing. So over time, there's that building process that happens. Yeah. Hello. Sincere apologies for the sudden interruption. I know that you were really enjoying that conversation with Matt, but right here, right now, I have to tell you a little bit about today's video sponsor, Lingoda. In case you're really on board with all the topics that we've been discussing about language learning, in case you want to find out more about how to supercharge your language learning, consider Lingoda as an online platform for your own language learning. This platform is essentially an online school with over 1,400 qualified teachers, native speakers, who will provide you with really engaging classes on your chosen language. And just in case you're a bit of a shyer person, Lingoda classes are conducted in very small groups with a teacher and a few of your classmates. And basically these classmates will be grouped into your language level. So you can choose the courses according to your language level. If you're, A2 or B1, B2, you can select the slots for those classes and basically engage in a very authentic sort of conversation with your teacher and your classmates. Course material also varies from lesson to lesson, so you won't ever get bored. And in case you have a busy schedule, Lingoda has a very, very good scheduling system, or has a very flexible 24/7 learning environment for you to modify your language learning with your daily life. And as a lucky viewer of this channel, Lingoda is offering you guys a 30% off of your Lingoda subscription if you follow my link in the description down below. Nevertheless, if you feel like you just need a bit of a oomph with your language learning, if you feel like you need safe space to make a fool of yourself, if you feel like you need a safe language environment for you to really practice this language in front of people that are actually speaking this language, native speaking teachers, be sure to check Lingoda out. And thank you, Lingoda, for supporting this channel. And right now, let's get back to the discussion.
I think it's also interesting with a language like Korean or other honorific languages. I think, not to their detriment, but books can generally prioritize the honorific language component of, let's say, Korean in this case. And so the more slang, the more idiomatic aspects of learning a language that, in this case would be more present in a casual sense. Little sayings, little things here and there. It's a lot easier to get access to them or to have certainty around the validity of those idioms or those sayings from just speaking with people, more so than trying to rely on the reputation of a certain website. And so that's
certain grammatical structure.
That as well.
Sometimes a phrase is just a phrase.
Yeah,
and then if you study the grammar of the phrase like falls apart.
Yeah.
And you can't really like do much with it. But if you just say it, it's like people are like, yeah, we get what you mean.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense in a literal translation, but that's the primary basis of slang to a certain extent. I feel in almost every language they would have similar versions of that, and you get access by speaking to the actual people more than reading the textbooks. Not to say that the textbooks aren't valuable at all. They're extremely useful in getting a grounding and a good foundation. But then when you actually go out on the streets, or on Zoom, either one.
Or on Zoom.
It's different. And so it's really valuable.
Completely. So let's talk about the process of learning, the system of language learning. that you've adopted.
Sure.
So walk me through like your daily sort of like, not checklist, but how you would approach language learning on a daily basis.
Sure.
Yeah.
I definitely started off a lot shakier than I am now.
Yeah.
I was one of those people that started off just thinking I could get away with doing, a Duolingo a day keeps the grammar doctor away.
No.
But that unfortunately is not the case, at least not for me. I feel like if you were to take that path, you would have to be a lot more rigorous in the amount of stuff that you can do. I feel like 5 or 10 minutes a day, at least for me, in my experience, hasn't been enough for me to really delve in to the extent to which I need to properly learn or understand something. And so currently, the methodology that I'm using is a combination of a couple of apps and then some PDFs that I have as well. So right now, I have been using this app called RemNote. You can write out all of these notes and then translate them directly into flashcards in the note-taking practice, I guess. And so that makes it easy to then just quickly make a bunch of flashcards on a bunch of different vocabulary or phrases or sentences to kind of get me up to speed on a particular group of things that I'm wanting to convey to other people. And so then from that point, I work through them, my day's worth of them. And then from there, I also have a set of books that I like to go through, do a lesson or two each day. So that keeps me on track with learning the grammatical principles that I would need to then be able to more progress myself in a structured way, alongside this more unstructured, just learning, as we were saying before, a group of phrases, a group of sentences, or combining words that I'm able to use to string things along to convey simple points, but can be used as templates to then be able to progress as I go through this more structured approach at the same time.
I feel like for me, language learning, because I've been learning French a little bit longer than you've been learning Korean.
Yes.
So it started, for me, it sort of started with a very rigorous sort of backbone, because I went to school for French and did a little exchange, and then back from the exchange, starting French all over again.
Yep.
So by the time that I was like able to acquire this language, I was speaking street French before I could speak proper French.
Yeah.
So that's why sometimes in my French classes, I would throw out a phrase here and there. The teacher looks at me like, you shouldn't say that in a class. I'm like, but that's just how people speak.
Yeah.
So there's this. So I started completely with grammar and textbook, and that's sort of like my way in to the language. But then now it's approaching a point where, so I feel like grammar and vocab and everything else, that's like the compost, compost in the compost bin.
Right.
And then you dump the shit out into your flower bed, and then that's the stuff that just basically, fertilizes the soil, and it gets it ready for flowers to come out of it.
Yeah.
So I think for the first 2 years of learning French, for me, that's like accumulating compost in a compost bin.
Yeah.
And then, but now it's like I've dumped a compost bin, like out of garbage in a compost bin, like into the flower bed now. Now I'm watching the flowers starting to come out and balloon.
Sure.
So now when I'm learning French, it's so much less structured than what it was like a few years ago. So a few years ago, it was like grammar practice every single day. But now it more feels like, wow, I can watch this thing, I can understand 80% of it. For example, in my French class right now, whoa, I can understand everything my teacher's saying. When I'm writing in French, it feels like, wow, I can write a sentence so much better now. So it's that gradual accumulation, and also reading French novels, it's just like, oh, I can understand the sentence now.
Yeah.
So it's literally about spending a few years mastering the basics, and then just kind of like make a fool of yourself, speak with French people, and then over time, flowers, those start to spring out of this shit that you have to go through in order to get to the beautiful parts of using a language.
I agree. I think similarly with the strategy that I'm using, as I said, kind of using these phrases as templates to then be able to almost interchange the vocab that you would need for different sentences. Using those shorthand phrases almost gives you that, as you were saying, that kind of compost to then be able to grow all of these next layer sentences out of that great foundation.
Yeah.
And so I agree. I think getting in, doing the work, understanding, to a certain extent, what you're working with is important. But I feel like as well, on top of that, it is important to just try things out and to do things and to, as we're saying this whole time, making these mistakes, because I feel like the more we make mistakes, the more we remember than if it was all just to be perfect from the beginning.
Also, the best way to learn is to make a fool of yourself.
Exactly
and
right.
And you feel embarrassed is like, next time I'm never ever gonna freaking do that again.
It's almost like a self-improvement kind of thing at the same time, where it's not so much just about rigorously learning this language to almost be like a computer that you can interact with another server. It really is this practice of almost lowering our ego to the extent to which we are okay with being like making fools of ourselves. And that's a life lesson outside of language learning as well.
Maybe being okay with like the fact that I might never sound like a French person when I speak French. That's why I had a drink with my friend Garance, French friend Garance, and then I started speaking to her in French. I was asking, what do you think of my accent in French? And she's like, your pronunciation is very clear, and then it's very understandable, you're French. But there's always a little bit of an accent in your French speaking. But she's like, you should keep it because it's you. Because it's part of you, because your native tongue is not French.
Yeah.
And that's just what's unique about it. You should keep it. Likewise, a French person speaks English. We find that adorable because of that French accent.
I think that's an interesting point, in that if we consciously were not to work on our native accent that we have, obviously making sure that we're pronouncing things correctly and our pronunciation is accurate, but if we are to prioritize actually keeping our native accent, that's a really interesting point, because I think that links back to almost self-image, self-identity as well, in that context of kind of like what we were saying before about how we almost, in some cases, shift our identity when we're learning a new language. If we are to remain or to have this thread of our being still exist in our accent, then even if we aren't able to get rid of it, but hypothetically, let's say we were able to get rid of it, but we chose to keep it, that is an interesting signature. It's an interesting lexical signature in the way that we are communicating is more us than the language itself. It almost gives a roadmap back to where it came from, which I think is an interesting idea. I agree.
So just to wrap things up, I think we've covered a lot of things in this video already.
Yes.
Such a great conversation. What is your ultimate goal with Korean?
Ideally, I'm going across to Korea. I'm going to study at a university called KAIST, and what I would love to be able to do is to go over there, have basic conversations with people. I'm going to be immersed in the culture for about a year, 2 semesters while I'm over there. So I'm going to experience all of the seasons, a lot of different opportunities and chances to kind of communicate with people. And I would love nothing more than to just be able to go into the shops, order something in Korean. I would love to have a brief conversation with one of my fellow students about a project or a report, or about their life, about my life, or catching up about something. I feel like having a year to really get quite deep on the different things that I'm wanting to be able to communicate will be really beneficial and really useful for me to get more out of the experience than I would have otherwise if I just went over like a regular international student who didn't want to learn the language or just wanted to pick up 1 or 2 words here and there. I feel like that'll make my experience a lot deeper and a lot more meaningful, at least for me.
Totally. Yeah. That's awesome.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Well,
so here's the first collab. Make sure to check out Matt's channel. Link in the description. He got a new camera, so now he's going to pump out that content.
That is true.
And we will be collabing more and more and more in the future because both of us have very similar plans. You're moving to Korea.
Yes.
And I have the plan and the ambition to move to France. So
yeah. Français?
France. La France. Let's see where
thank you so much for having me, man. It's been a fantastic time. I know we've been meaning to do this for a long time. It's been so good to be able to actually sit down and kind of get some of this stuff
and
out.
have the space to do it too.
Finally.
Yeah, finally. Anyhow, thanks for coming.
Awesome, dude. Thanks, man.
I'll catch you in another episode.
See you soon.
And thank you for watching.
Thanks, guys.